We're going to talk about wedging. All right, wedges deserve a video all by themselves. They are such a fantastic tool, and I wish I had known about the use of wedges when I first started felling trees. I made an awful lot of mistakes and got into an awful lot of trouble early on because I didn't know what wedges were or how to use them. So this video is not going to talk about the other components of felling a tree. The essential components include things like tree assessment, establishing an escape path, that sort of stuff. I cover that in another video, 10 steps to fell a tree. So check that out. But this video is going to be more of a close-up look at how to use wedges with basic scenarios, okay? So first thing I want to say is you can't get away with too much lean with wedges alone. All right, you might have to install a pullover rope or use other techniques. But wedges are fantastic at assisting to aim a tree or overcome minor lean, and they're really good at steering trees that are mostly straight up and down. They provide mechanical advantage, but they depend on the hinge of the tree as well. So a wedge by itself is not going to fell your tree for you and make it go the direction that you want. You have to still have a good face cut, and you still have to leave a proper thickness of hinge for the wedges to do their job. All right, so here's a couple of different types of wedges. You see they come in a lot of different sizes. These types you can just get from like your local Ace, or I think this one was from Tractor Supply. These hard heads, they have a steel backing to them. These are my favorite for the bigger trees. I think these are by far the best wedges on the market that I have found. And but I have to order these online. You can get these from treestuff.com, among other places. These red heads, these are okay. They're not. I don't like them as much as the hard heads, but they're better than your Ace and Tractor Supply brands. But to get started, just a wedge from Ace or Tractor Supply or Lowe's or whatever is it's perfectly fine. And for smaller trees, you can get by with these. As you step up to medium-sized trees and then the big trees, you're gonna need bigger, heavier wedges. What you wanna consider is you don't want to hit your wedge with your chainsaw. You see all this damage to my wedges because they've been repeatedly nicked by chainsaws. And we file them back down with a sander or a grinder. We kind of put a new taper on them so that we can get more use out of them. But obviously that's not ideal. All right, so I like to start with a shorter wedge, and then I kind of chase my cut a little bit, and then I'll put in, if I need to, I'll put in a longer wedge. All right, you get more lift, and you can cause that tree to kind of tip over more and more with the longer wedges because you can drive them farther and farther. And then the other thing that you might end up having to consider is stacking your wedges. We probably won't have to do it in this scenario, but when you want to get extra lift and one wedge isn't enough, you can stack your wedges. It helps to have thinner wedges to stack. So, this one's a little bit thicker. It's good. It's a great wedge to drive by itself, but when I try to use it to stack, they tend to spit out because they're not as streamlined. So for these hard heads, for whatever reason, their 12 inches are thinner than their 10 inchers, and I like stacking their 12 inchers. All right, so there's a 10 and a 12. You can see that the 10 is thicker than the 12. All right, that'll make more sense as you do more and more wedging. All right, spitting them out is it's a very easy thing to do, especially when you're double stacking. But when you're not double stacking, you're just driving a single wedge, spit out is nowhere near as much of an issue to worry about, unless you hit your apex. So look at this long wedge, and I'm going to do my back cut, and I'm going to stop right about here. The back of my hinge is going to be sort of where my finger is. If I just keep driving this wedge and the tree isn't going over, like, I'm out of space. I'm just gonna smush the tip of the wedge into the back of the hinge, and it's going to curl that plastic up pretty badly. Okay, so at that point, if you're this far in and the tree still hasn't gone over, that's when you need to double stack. All right, so let's talk about the procedure here so that we don't hit our wedge. We're just going to start our back cut, and once I have enough room in my back cut to place a wedge without worrying about hitting my chainsaw, without worrying about my chainsaw hitting that wedge, that's when I'm going to just kind of place it in there, and I'm going to tap it in a little bit by hand. I am not going to drive it, okay, because I don't want to advance it too close to my running chain. And then I'm going to continue my little back cut, and I'm going to tap it in, chasing the cut with the wedge. That way I've got tons of space between the tip of this wedge and my running chain. Now, here's a little trick. You have your wedge in the back of your cut. If, as you're setting your hinge, you can watch that wedge. If the wedge starts to stand up, the tree is sitting back. But if the wedge starts to fall out, the tree is going the way that you want, and you don't even need the wedge. All right, so that's a helpful trick. If the wedge starts to stand up, I'm gonna pause and drive it in a little bit. Reason for that is I don't wanna be too shallow and the tree starts to sit back and I'm only in this this bark layer or the very outer rings of sapwood that's a little bit softer, and I don't, I could actually kind of get pinched out even for the wedge to go in. All right, so you do have to chase it a little bit, but you don't want to chase it, you don't want to drive it in so deep that you're hitting your chain. Another helpful tip, and then I'll get started here. You cut lower and you make a shallow face cut, and you're maximizing the girth of the tree. The more girth of tree you have, the more space you have to wedge, okay? If I'm like up in narrower diameter tree, I have less space to wedge. And that's the same with my face cut. If my face cut goes too deep, then the back of my hinge is going to be further into the center of the tree, and I have less room to drive my wedges. Okay? So, without going any further into that, let's try to demonstrate this. Right now, I might be tempted to put a wedge in right there, right? But I'm going to be moving my saw, and as I move my saw, it's going to hit the wedge. So I'm not going to do that just yet. No, let's turn it on, that'll help. Right about here is where I want to start having a wedge in. I don't want to get too far, because the tree might sit back on me. It probably will, actually, in this case. You can use a wedge to kind of set a wedge. I just want to get past that bark layer and that first ring or two of sapwood, so that if it does sit back, I'm not pinched out of the cut with my wedge, okay? But I don't want to go too deep, because then I'm going to hit my saw. All right, so I need to set my hinge on this side, set my hinge on the other side, then we'll drive we're going to watch and see if this wedge lifts up or starts to fall out. As I advance my cut, my bar is going further and further that way. I can drive this, and that's what I'm referring to as chasing. I'm chasing my cut with my wedge. All right? I can feel a lot of resistance there, so I assume the tree is sitting back on me. All right, we're just gonna set our hinge on that side, and then we're gonna go to the wedging. Hopefully it'll actually stay, and that way I can really demonstrate good wedging technique. All right, so cool, this is actually staying for us. That's nice. I'm gonna go ahead and put another wedge in, and there's a technique here to drive one and then drive the other, and they they take turns sharing the load. And when one is sharing the load, you strike the other and it drives a lot deeper. So rather than just slamming and making limited progress on one, I'm going to alternate my strikes. And you can do two, just to make sure you really got it. But if I just pound this and pound this and pound this, I'm limited as opposed to striking like that. All right, this baby's gonna go soon. Now remember, I don't want to get too close to the back of my hinge. In the event that I can't fell this tree, I might want to go in and whittle away at the hinge with the saw, but I don't want to block myself with these wedges if they're driven too deep. If I drive these wedges in deep enough and the tree hasn't committed, then I'll have a nice open space of my back cut to double stack, and I'm sure that in this scenario that'll be more than enough. This is a very simple scenario. Sometimes they get really complicated and really hard. So just start with small to medium-sized trees that you feel comfortable with. Look at those hard heads. I can like just smash them. I can smash those hard heads. Limber. All right, come on in on this stump here. So, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if you're watching this video, then you probably you probably don't know how wedges work super well. This is not for the more experienced guys, so I'm going to explain this on this stump here. This is my hinge. This is an essential part of the felling equation. The three parts are the notch, which is also known as the face cut, the hinge, and the back cut. And the back cut can be a traditional back cut like I demonstrated just now, or it can be a plunge cut, all right? Again, in another video, I demonstrate plunge cutting, so we're not gonna talk about any of that. Let's just talk about the wedges. I did my traditional back cut. So, I'm gonna put my chainsaw on here. This is how I started. I came in like that. I did not put a wedge in just yet because as I rock my saw, because you rock your saw while you're cutting, right? So as I rock my saw, look, I'm hitting it, I'm hitting it, I'm hitting it. So I waited until I was like this deep in. Then I just kind of set it in right on the edge, okay? And then I kind of worked around. I set my hinge corner on that side. Once I set my hinge corner on that side, I drove this wedge in just a little bit. And then I started to rotate around and I set my other corner of the hinge. So you want a nice parallel hinge. You don't want a diamond shaped hinge. And a diamond shaped hinge is by doing this motion right here. You're going like that and you keep going to the corners of your hinge, but you leave all this middle space uncut. And that will fight the crap out of you as well. So the tree won't go over if you leave a diamond shaped hinge, okay? So anyways, I set this side, and then I brought in my power head side, and I chased it a little bit. I drove it in a little bit as I was going. Then I pulled my saw out, and then I wedged it. I was able to wedge it over. Now, you can come in from the sides and kind of work the sides and get a little bit more lift than, in some cases, than you can from just straight back. But that's with the bigger trees. In this scenario, I'm pretty much gonna get just as much lift coming straight behind as I would from the sides, because by the time I come in behind, I have enough space to get all the way to my back cut. All the way to my hinge. Okay, all right, that's basic wedging. Hope this was helpful for you guys who are learning how to fell trees. Please be careful. Please check out our other videos on the felling process. And let me know in the comments if you want to learn anything else.